Hello and good morning, everybody, and a warm welcome from very cloudy, gray and foggy Brussels. Thank you so much for joining us today for this second day of the first conference of the European Recognition for Prior Learning Network. Today is the 6th of November. Yesterday, we already had the first day, the first event in this event series. Yesterday, we gave a brief introduction into the concept and methodology of recognition of prior learning. What is it? What is it for? What does it aim to achieve? And today we will continue with the leadership and policy perspectives on recognition of prior learning in Europe. Before we start, I have to send out a little apology for those of you who were at the event yesterday. Unfortunately, due to technical issues, we had to finish the event yesterday a little bit early. But the event organizers, the event hosts at AQ Austria have taken the necessary precautions to make sure that this will not happen today. We cannot foresee the future, and technology is a bit fickle, as we all know by now. So should something happen again today, please do try again to join us 2 minutes later, and we will resume the event. But we keep our fingers crossed that absolutely nothing will happen today, and we can continue our event until 12:30. CET as originally planned. Well, so again, thank you for joining us today. Just a couple of practical remarks. The event is recorded, and yes, we will publish the recordings after the events have taken place. All of the events in this event series, in this conference, are recorded. So if you missed a day, or if you want to revisit some discussions and presentations of any of the events, you will certainly be able to do that with the recordings. We also have a couple of presentations by our expert speakers today, and you will receive them as well in case you want to have a look at the details. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers today, moving from the European over to the national and then the institutional level, and trying to get an understanding of how recognition of prior learning is perceived, whether it is prioritized at the European, national, institutional level, and what exactly the policies say. And towards the end, we will also talk a little bit about practices in recognition of prior learning, the pitfalls, and a couple of other insights into the practice of it. Our speakers for today, I will again introduce them later on, one by one. But just for a quick overview, we have today with us David Crozier, who is a higher education system and policy analyst at Eurydice. Then we have Nora Angelova, who is an executive committee member at the European Students' Union. We also have Dag Hofthuigen with us, who is Executive Director of the Division for Recognition and Admission at the Norwegian Directorate for Higher Education and Skills. And finally, we have with us Annika Meike-Maschwitz, who is a member of the University Executive Board, but also a Vice Rector for Studies, Teaching and Internationalization at Bremen City University of Applied Sciences in Germany. I should probably also quickly introduce myself. I am Helene Peterbauer, and I have the honor of chairing you, facilitating this event today, and guiding you through our presentations on leadership and policy perspectives on recognition of prior learning in Europe. I'm a policy analyst at the European University Association here in cloudy, rainy, and foggy Brussels, as I already mentioned. Okay, let's start with the event. Yes, before I start, last minute practical details. We do have a Q&A section, the questions and answers section. You will not find a chat. So please, if you have any questions for our panelists today, and we do hope that you have questions, please do put them into the questions and answers section, which you will find at the bottom of your screen under Q&A. You can also upvote the questions of others. There's a little thumbs up if you want to boost those and push them to the top so we know that you agree with this question. You would also like to hear the answer to that. Please do upvote the questions. And now, finally, we do start with our presentations. We do want to start with the European level, so we move from the broad to the more narrow perspective on recognition of prior learning. And recognition of prior learning is all about the learner. It is about ensuring flexible learning paths. It is about ensuring lifelong learning. It is quite a useful tool or approach to support lifelong learning and flexible learning paths. Hence, it is on the policy agenda of European level policy and decision makers. Later on, we will also hear about the national and the institutional perspectives, but it is also something very important for the students, for the learners who are meant to be aided in achieving lifelong learning and flexible learning paths. So we will start with the student perspective first. And with this, I welcome to the stage Nora Angelova from the European Students' Union. The European Students' Union, or ESU in short, is the umbrella organization of 44 national students' unions from 40 European countries, if I'm not mistaken. And Nora Angelova is here today with us to tell us a little bit about the student perspective on recognition of prior learning from a fresh report that was published just earlier this year. So with this, I hand over to you, Nora. And I stop sharing so you can start sharing your presentation.
Thank you, Helen, for the introduction, and hello, everybody. I am quickly starting to share my presentation. I hope that you see it well. Yep.
Yes, we can see it. If you could just start the presentation mode.
Okay. So that should work now. Hello, everybody. Again, for me, it's a great pleasure to be with you today. And thanks for the opportunity to share the students' perspective on recognition of prior learning. Today, I'll be sharing with you some insights and challenges from the Bologna with Student Eyes report done by European Students' Union. So starting with the introduction, what is recognition of prior learning? So it is the process of acknowledging learning obtained outside of formal education, such as work experience or independent study. Why does it matter? It makes actually higher education more accessible, equitable, and responsive to diverse learning backgrounds. What is the link of RPL to Bologna process? Actually, RPL is an essential part of Bologna process goals. It is supporting flexibility, mobility, and lifelong learning in the European higher education area. And also recognition of prior learning embodies student-centered learning, which is a cornerstone of the Bologna process, and it empowers students to achieve educational goals efficiently. Here you can see a map that is taken out from the BWSC report, which you will have access after that, of course. This map actually shows the status of RPL implementation throughout Europe. You can see the legend here with the colors. There are quite a few countries that, unfortunately, the answer of the students is that the RPL is sometimes, rarely, or even never implemented. Why are we talking about RPL and what are the benefits of RPL for students? So it actually allows students to bypass redundant courses, which of course saves time and resources. It also helps students to formalize skills that is of course improving the job prospects and enhances the employability of students after all. It is connected to accessible education because RPL opens pathways for non-traditional students such as older students or working professionals. And as well, RPL aligns with ESU's push for student autonomy in curriculum design. Nonetheless, recognition of prior learning actually helps the active citizenship and education for democracy by recognition of non-formal learning. And another benefits of RPL is for the refugees and migrants because it supports the integration and their access to higher education. Here is a graph in which we can see the key barriers to effective recognition of prior learning. There are, of course, a lot of things that you can see on the screen, but I have highlighted two of them. First of all, the institutional resistance. So many institutions prioritize traditional academic paths and have limited understanding of the benefits of the recognition of prior learning, which is a problem, of course. And then second of all, there is the financial and resource constraints that hinder the effective RPL procedures and implementation. But on the screen, you can also see that there is a high percentage of lack of top-level coordination and, of course, lack of interest by the government to implement RPL more efficiently or in general. Now, the student perspectives on RPL. Students and we in ESO representing students, we seek clear, transparent RPL processes across institutions. We call for standardized, unbiased evaluation of prior learning to ensure equity-based, but based on the learning outcomes, not on ECTS, for example. Students also advocate for guidance, such as RPL advisors and resources to make RPL more accessible and, of course, understandable, because not all students understand the way RPL works or should work. And that's why ESO advocates for systematic and reliable RPL processes, so that there is ensured that every student can capitalize on their prior learning experiences, formally or informally acquired in their higher education journey. Here I have brought up some good practices, some examples of good practices across Europe. So, for example, in Norway, there are national policies that are standardizing RPL and easing the process. In France, there is widespread acceptance of work experience as part of formal academic credit. And in the Netherlands, there is dedicated RPL centers in the universities that support students in identifying and documenting prior learning. So these are some good examples of how RPL can be implemented in other countries as well, and should be implemented in other countries as well. How is RPL connected to lifelong learning goals? RPL actually enables people of all ages to pursue higher education, which of course is aligning with the lifelong learning and reskilling objectives in the European higher education area. RPL is especially valuable for mid-career professionals that are seeking new qualifications without starting from scratch. And RPL in the BWSC advocacy, we think that it should be part of all lifelong learning strategies. Now, the report from BWSC, you can see that we have recommendations for improving RPL. I have highlighted some of them. So the highest three recommendations are that there should be unified RPL standards. There should be increased student support, as I mentioned before. There's some students have to be supported in that, and they have to have the information about how they could actually use their prior learning experience. And there should also be enhanced awareness campaigns in university to actively inform students about RPL options and processes. Of course, we as students have role in advocating for RPL throughout organizations like ours, like European Students' Union. We play a vital role in pushing for fair RPL policies. There should be partnerships between student unions on national level and educational authorities to enhance RPL accessibility. And in the future, students advocating for RPL as a right in higher education policy discussions. We also have some recommendations, policy recommendations for institutions, such as to establish clear, consistent, and transparent RPL assessment methods that foster trust, for the government to provide financial and legislative support to standardize the RPL across the EHEA, and the student advocacy to encourage the student unions to push for representation in RPL policy development. With that, I want to thank you for your attention. Here I have put the code in which will take you to the BWSC report straight. And of course, you will get the presentation after that with a link to that if you're interested to read more. So thank you on behalf of European Students' Union for your attention.
Thank you so much, Nora. We already have a question in the Q&A section, and even though we would generally want to keep questions for the later discussion, this one is very pertinent to your presentation. So could you please answer the question how the data for the BWSE, for the Bologna with Students' Eyes report was collated?
So the data for the BWSE report was collected from all of the national unions across Europe that are members of ESO throughout surveys and data gathering. So this is information on a national level from every country.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
And as I mentioned before to the audience, please do not be shy about writing other questions in the Q&A section. This event is an opportunity to hear from each other and to exchange practices, experiences, and to maybe also clarify some questions about recognition of prior learning. So please do take advantage of this live opportunity to engage with our speakers. So thank you again, Nora. We will get back to you later to hear your views on success factors and challenges in the implementation of recognition of prior learning. But first, we do want to hear from our other European level speaker. Here with us today, we have David Crozier from Eurydice. David is a higher education system and policy analyst at Eurydice, which in most contexts is known as a tragic mythological character from Greek mythology, but in this context, it is in fact a European Commission organized network that is dedicated to explaining, gathering data, and displaying data on higher education systems in Europe. And also here we do have a rather fresh report on European level higher education policies, developments, and progress. So David will tell us about other Bologna process related data, also with a focus on recognition of prior learning. Over to you, David.
Thanks very much, Ellen. Yeah, I apologize because I think my connection, my network is very unstable. So if there are any problems, I apologize. And Ellen, if you could show the. So thank you. Yeah, as Ellen said, at Eurydice, we're not kind of exploring Orpheus in the underworld, but we're looking at developments in education. We've recently done a report in the context of the Bologna process, as did ESU, so Nora's report on looking at aspects from the student perspective. We looked at it from picking up information from governments about the different commitments made. So you can find everything in this higher education area in 24 report, Bologna Process Implementation Report, which covers a lot of topics, but I'm just going to focus on one small in the report, small aspect of RPL. So if you could keep going on the next slide. So just to situate the issue of recognition of prior learning, it's actually a very long-standing commitment in the policy discussion at European level. So it was first mentioned in the 2003 Berlin communique, where the communique urges institutions and all concerned to enhance the possibilities for lifelong learning at higher education level, including the recognition of prior learning. So at that point, it was mentioned as an objective. It then reappears in every single communique between 2003 and 2018. Then, for some reason, there's no mention of RPL in 2020, but it comes back in the Tirana communique in 2024. So you would think, if you just track ministerial communiques, that that this has been a kind of issue of attention in higher education policy development throughout the last 2 decades. But the question is, how has the reality of implementation of possibilities to have prior learning recognized, how has this reality changed? And what I want to show you first is the picture that we saw in a report in 2010. So here, first of all, we had a report where we saw 2 aspects. One was the provision of alternative routes to higher education. So it was just simply asking whether legislation enables alternative routes rather than, coming directly out of upper secondary education and into higher education. Are there alternative routes that are possible for students, or are there no alternative routes? And it's actually quite a stark and spectacular division that appears in Europe at this point. So you see that there are systems in the northwest and south, but not on the eastern side, where alternative routes are possible. And if you then also look at the next slide, which is about recognition of prior learning, whether this is permitted, then you can see, if we move to the next slide, that that there are countries where institutions have to recognize. So there's a requirement that they recognize RPL. So, for example, in France, it was established as a legal right. Then there were many systems also coinciding with those we saw in the previous slide, which permitted the use of recognition of prior learning for higher education access or completion. But then there were also lots of systems where legislation simply didn't mention recognition of prior learning at all. So that was the picture in 2010. But if we move on to the next slide, we come to what we see now. So this was for the reference year for 2022-23, which we use for the Bologna process implementation report. And here we've got a kind of more detailed picture that in the first cycle you can either
David, your audio is breaking off. David, are you still with us? I don't think so. No? Oh, okay, here he is. Okay, David, your microphone is currently muted, but your video is on. So if you could unmute yourself but switch off your camera, maybe this would free a little bit of bandwidth.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, really sorry about that. But anyway, yeah, we're looking at this situation in 22-23. So where you can see the possibility for accessing the first cycle based on RPL, or you can see you can see that it's possible in all or in some institutions, and then you can see also whether RPL could contribute to the fulfillment of first cycle study programs, so replacing credits, and whether that's possible in all or in some institutions. And what we can see very clearly here is that there has been a development in the use of recognition of prior learning. So a lot of the countries in the eastern part of Europe, which previously did not permit recognition of prior learning at all, have opened up their systems, but they've mostly done it in terms of allowing recognition of prior learning to be contributing to the fulfillment of study programs, but not to accessing higher education institution first cycle programs. So, so in other words, we still see that there is a division, and there's been a lack of progress in terms of the use of recognition of prior learning for accessing higher education. But there has been some development in terms of the use of recognition of prior learning to provide credits in higher education programs. So that's the picture. And if we move to the next slide, then we developed actually a scorecard indicator, so a kind of composite indicator in the report on flexible learning. And for this, there were 4 elements which were considered. First of all, that regulations allow institutions to offer part-time, blended and distant learning programs. So as examples of different types of flexible learning. Then we looked at the 2 issues from the previous map. The entry is possible on the basis of recognition of prior learning. And then we look at the aspect of whether quality assurance agencies are required to address prior learning in their RPL in their external evaluation procedures. And the map which comes from that, if we move to the next slide, is actually, well, probably what we would expect given the previous picture, that we see that things are relatively okay from a legal perspective in many countries, although there is still progress to be made in giving opportunities to access higher education. That's a big issue, I think, still. And particularly you see in the Balkan countries, and that there is still no movement really on the kind of more flexible provision in higher education. So we see that things have improved, but there's still a lot of room for further progress. And this is being, well, has been brought to the attention of policymakers in the context of the Bologna process discussions. So yeah, this is what we found from the implementation report, and happy to address questions if I'm able to when you're able to hear me. Thank you. And I think you'll see on the next slide that I think there's access to the report. So there's a QR code if you want to get the report. Yeah. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, David. Actually, your presentation has sparked a couple of questions. Since we already took one question before for Nora's presentation, I would say that we take one question now, if you agree with that, and then keep the rest for later. Mm-hmm. So perhaps we can start with one of the more overarching questions, which is, what is the recognition of prior learning percentage that a student can be recognized for in Europe in the higher education institutions? I'm not sure if you have any data or any indications on that. Did you also get data on any percentages? I would understand that it really differs from country to country, but I'm not sure if you have any data on that, David.
Well, I think we do have some data on that, but not in terms of percentages within a program. So what we can distinguish is whether it's whether you can have all of a program accredited. So so you can actually have up to the entire qualification being awarded on the basis of RPL, which is possible in very few systems. Or whether it's a partial replacement of credits, and then yeah, there are indeed different limits put in different systems, but I couldn't give you the information off the top of my head about that. So but there is quite a variety, and I think the most common sort of cutoff point is something like 60 CTS as a maximum is the most common.
Indeed, yes. Okay, thank you. So as I mentioned, there are also other questions in the Q&A section. To the audience, please feel free to add more if you want to, and to vote on questions so we know which ones to prioritize later. But in the meantime, I say again, thank you very much to David for your insightful presentation. Another presentation on the Bologna process, which is this European self-committed process of higher education reform that the ministries responsible for higher education are implementing. But moving on from this European perspective on the recognition of prior learning, we are now moving to the national level, and we can only pick one because we only have so much time in this webinar. So we decided to have a look at an example from Norway. And here with us today to explain to us recognition of prior learning from the Norwegian policy perspective is Dag Hofthagen, who is the executive director at the Division of Recognition and Admission at the Norwegian Directorate for Higher Education and Skills, which is Norway's executive agency for the Norwegian Ministry of Education and Research. Dag, thank you so much for being with us today. We look forward to hearing from you how Norway is handling the issue of recognition of prior learning. And we hope to also maybe get some good practice inspiration on how to handle recognition of prior learning from the policy perspective, or maybe also some insightful challenges.
So, can you hear me and see my screen?
Yes, all perfect. Thank you.
Yes, very good. I have been thoroughly introduced, so thank you, Helena. I'd also like to say thank you to Nora and David for coming ahead of me and kind of laying out the policy and laying out the overview of Europe, which was very beneficial and very good for kind of putting it then to the national perspective. I'm from Norway. You might have seen Norway on the maps that they have produced, and I'm going to talk about the Norwegian experience. I'm from the directorate, which means we are an executive body. We're not a political body, but we are in charge of kind of taking the policies out. We're not on the institutional level. So we are on the systematic level, but still we have a good view on how this actually works on the ground. So I'm going to talk a little about the legal framework in Norway. We call it validation of prior learning, the challenges to the current system, and then our priorities in this work. Just to lay out the kind of the layout in Norway, and I think it's similar in most European countries, that we are facing a demographic change. We have an aging population. As we say, we are too few hands and too few heads in the future. We see a decrease in the working population as relation to the people in retirement and the younger population, which means we have fewer people to kind of do the work the country needs. And of course, this has led to an increased focus in completion in education and also on lifelong learning, which has a strong standing in Norway and has had for several years. One of the mottos is that all people should be able to use their skills. And of course, this is a very idealistic goal or an idealistic ambition. And as I will talk something about, is that you try to implement it, but there are also quite a few very, very kind of visible challenges. So Norway is a country where we like to regulate things. So we have put this into law. As David also said, the University and University Colleges Act provide overreaching principles for admissions to higher education in Norway. And so the general admission is based on the standard higher education entrance qualification that you obtain through upper secondary school, BA high school. And then you have the exceptions, and one of them being the recognition or validation of prior learning. If you in Norway are age 25 or over and you do not have a higher education entrance qualification, you may apply on the basis of prior learning. This means that this is an official pathway regulated by law for access to higher education in Norway. The objective of this is, of course, to allow individuals without formal qualifications to access higher education. But when we look at the numbers, even though this is a possibility, I'm now taking entry into the first cycle. And in Norway, we have a joint admission service, which means that we have to all universities and colleges, which means that we have a good overview and good statistics on this. As you can see, when you look at the total applicants to higher education and the ones applying for recognition of prior learning, and also those who actually receive an offer, you will see that this is a very small number, and it's also actually, it's not increasing, it's getting smaller. And there are several reasons for this, which I will go into, but I think the general thing is to say that to have a political, very idealistic ambition on top and to kind of regulate it and then see that this does not necessarily solve all the problems or challenges on the institutional level, because the regulation in Norway does not provide for concrete measures on how this is done, what the outcome should be, and how this should be organized in the different institutions. So on one hand, you have the regulatory bodies, and on the other hand, you have the institutional autonomy, which means that there isn't kind of a direct link that makes things happen, even though they are regulated in law. So what are the difficulties? In 2003, there was a committee who provided a public report on admissions to higher education in Norway. And some of the challenges that they found to the current system of recognition of prior learning is, first, there are, as I said, few applications. Many people do not know about this possibility. The system is not very user-friendly as of today, and it's not easy to understand. This is, of course, because the responsibility is down on the institutional level. And given that the general admission service in Norway for higher education is centralized, it's based on your grades from upper secondary, and it's only based on grades, which means that in Norway, this is what people are used to. So the alternative path of recognition of prior learning is somewhat different. You have the institutional autonomy. There are separate guidelines and practices in each institutions, and we have to say that some have come a lot further than others. The methodology, practice based on checking out previous former qualifications, which was really not the intention of recognition of prior learning. But I think we have found that institutions struggle on how to do this in practice. If you go to some other countries, they have admissions that use interviews, use essays, use other sorts of admission kind of criteria. In Norway, as we are based on grades, the institutions are not really used to this either. It's also a very resource intensive system to administer. If you are to do interviews, for example, background checks, whatever, this costs a lot more money than might be kind of set aside for this purpose. So even though this is a responsibility that the institutions have, it might not be a focus. And the reason for this is that it has been shown that this has quite a low priority in the institutions, and they, when they can choose, prefer students with formal qualifications. And there might be reasonable reasons for this. For example, it has shown that it's hard for many who are recognized on the basis of prior learning to get into higher education, because even though they might have the skills formally, they might not be used to English. Most Norwegian higher education programs will have a lot of material in English. That might be hard. being used to how a university or college work might be a different way of working that they're used to, and so on. So as long as the institution get a lot of their funding based on what they produce, the output, they haven't kind of seen the students coming in recognized on the basis of prior learning as very profitable students, which of course is not an excuse, but it's still a reason. So this report recommended that the system should be continued and improved, that the higher education sector must develop more common understanding of recognition of prior learning and how to practice and develop criteria, guidelines that are understandable, good, transparent, and so on. And the methodology has to be improved in a sense that they have to do something more than checking documents and to use interviews. There has to be a methodology that actually kind of make it visible what kind of real competences that this person has from prior learning. This was followed by a white paper on the admissions systems that came this spring. And this proposed that the current system of recognition of prior learning is continued, which it is going to be. And so I come back to our directorate. What do we do in this case? We see that institutions struggle with this. The legal framework is in place. I think what David said about these 4 points, I think the most difficult one is the bottom one, getting the quality assurance to actually be a part of this. And I also think that the third point about including prior learning in degrees is hard because of the quality assurance thing, but it's still something that we need to work more with. For the directorate, it's important for us to have a dialogue with the sector on initiatives and especially increase the use of recognition of prior learning in continuing education, because this is somewhat easier. Also encourage the establishment of best practices and then explore options for introducing new methods in the recognition of prior learning. So, for example, we also I'm in charge of admissions and recognition, and we then recognize that the directorate education from foreign countries. And so as a part of this, we have a methodology for refugees that we have used and also used into the establishment of, for example, the European qualifications for refugees, the European qualification passport for refugees, which use an interview-based system of actually discovering a person's qualifications. So we are in dialogue with seeing how this methodology could be introduced into institutions, and we are in dialogue with our ministry for seeing how we could kind of support institutions in enhancing the use of these practices in recognition of prior learning. So this is where we are. I think I'm really looking forward to hearing what the institutional level has to say about this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dag.
And then I'll stop sharing and get back to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you so much for explaining to us the practical challenges, but also positive developments with regards to recognition of prior learning and what it looks like in practice in Norway. There was actually one question to you. Some participants would be interested to know why recognition of prior learning in Norway is only possible for applicants over 25 years.
This is because we are working a lot on completing high school or completing up and secondary. So when you're under 25, there is a special program for making you complete high school instead, so to speak. So this is meant for, I mean, because also you need to have some time to actually acquire prior learning, right?
Exactly. Yes. Makes sense. Yes. Okay, good. With this, I thank you again. We will get back to you later, of course, and would like to hear more from you, Dag, later. But in the meantime, I hand over to our fourth and final speaker for today, Professor Annika Maike-Marschwitz, who is Vice Rector for Studies, Teaching and Internationalization at Bremen City University of Applied Sciences. In her role, she has among her particular research interests the organization and management of continuing education and lifelong learning, and will also be able to tell us a couple of practice examples from the University of Applied Sciences in Bremen, Germany. Professor Marschwitz, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the kind words, for the introduction and for the invitation to this event. And thank you also to all speakers beforehand. We make it possible to go inside the institution directly without more words about RPL and the national as well as European level. So I have the honor to give you a short insight in the University of Applied Science in Bremen. University of Applied Science in Bremen is one of the universities of applied science in Germany. And I say that because it's really important to know that in the universities of applied science in Germany, RPL is more, I would say, deeper implemented and used as in the universities, because we are quite related to our contract partners, to the practice, and to those working directly with in the degree program. So the organizations, companies, and so on, they are part of the educational system at the universities of applied science. Another thing I would like to mention before I start is the specific system in Germany that we have. On the one hand, the higher education system, and on the other hand, the vocational system. This is so important to know, as we are talking about RPL, it's always also about recognition of competencies that are gathered within the vocational system and then part of the higher education system afterwards. So especially in the bachelor degree programs, this is a big issue. And I will show you one example or two examples afterwards where you can see that. And another point I would like to mention before is really related to what Doug told us before. In Germany, prior learning in the vocational system also allows the entry to the higher education systems under specific conditions. It's not the age in this case. It's more about the preconditions, so that there's a finalized vocational, that you have finalized a vocational degree and that you have already practical experience in your profession. Then you get the allowance also to study in specific fields of University of Applied Science, but also all the other universities. And the last point, this also includes people from other countries, so who have university entrance qualification for their own countries, but maybe not for Germany. They also get the possibility through specific assessments to get their entrance to the higher education system through the prior learning that they already got within their countries. So these points are maybe helpful to understand why we are working like we work within the University of Applied Science in Bremen. I give you 3 examples, and I try to explain also the preconditions and the framework of these prior learnings, because, as I said, it's also specific to the national frameworks and also to the specific situation in the universities of applied science. So the first example that I would like to share with you is a degree program. It's about speech and language pathologists and physiotherapists. And in this case, normally we have bachelor programs up to 7 or even 8 semesters, sometimes also 6, but here in Bremen, 7, the regular standard, 7 semester, one bachelor degree. As you can see here, so a bachelor degree will only last 3 semesters, and that's because we totally recognize the prior experience and the prior learning in the vocational system. So they are all people who are starting this bachelor program are already physiotherapists or language pathologists. So they have already, we call it Staatsexamen, that's really a certificate of clinical competences that they have to reach before they can enter the study program. So here that's really in combination of a vocational certificate or degree and a study program that were a bachelor degree. So there's the prior learning is recognized as a lump sum, as you would like to say. So there's no individual assessment. It's more a general assessment, general recognition of the competencies they are got within the vocational system. That is one example. We have another one here. It's in the field of midwifery. So there we have a study program, and we have have parallel system in the vocational, we have in the vocational system a parallel way to get midwifery exams, and also here we have a combination between the vocational training or the vocational system and the higher education system, but it's not as you can see here with a therapist. It's not that that you reach directly the 4 semester. No, you have to apply for it, and then maybe you get the recognition for specific courses within the study program. It can be up to 50%. It depends on your prior learning experience, also in the profession as well in the vocational system. But this is really specific, I think, also in Germany, because we have the vocational system parallel. Example, it's maybe really common in the field of universities of applied science. We have quite a lot of cooperation with vocational schools. Here, this example shows you a technical college, which are preparing students for a specific field in the technical or engineering field. From the technical college, there's a further training course or continuing education in the field of mechanical engineering. And there was a comparison between this program and the technical college and our bachelor degrees in the field of mechanical engineering, but also in related study programs, because they have the same basic subjects. And at the end, after this comparison, we can recognize 8 modules for our bachelor degree. If students have finished specific technical college we have contact with. So this is also really interesting for the students here, I think, because 8 modules, that's more than 1 semester that they can skip in total. That doesn't mean that they skip the first semester. It's more that they have different modules in the first semesters that they could apply for, that they get recognized for the bachelor degree. Therefore, it's a specific procedure I will right now, because it's quite similar to the recognition of individual competencies or prior learning experiences. You have to apply for that. It's not that's like by its own. If you have a look on the individual procedure, so if there's no contract and no inclusion within the degree programs, the students has the possibility as well to come to the universities, apply for a study program, and ask then for specific modules if they can get recognized prior learning for that. So if it's the case, they should start with a reflection and identification process. There's a clear procedure described. I will show you later also the application formula. But unfortunately, we do not have a platform something like this in our university. Other universities in Germany do have that. So there's the whole process I described right now really accompanied by experts who help the students to go through this process. Unfortunately, we cannot have this service at our university due to resources which were already mentioned before. The second step is then a competence description, so what they have reached for there. Therefore, it's really helpful if, especially in the vocational system, but also in other systems, there's a clear definition of learning outcomes as well. I think we all know about that it's much easier to compare existing or good learning descriptions and learning outcome description than from the scratch. After that, the students have to bring proofs of their competency or for the learning outcomes they've reached so far, and therefore there is a longer application formula. I put it here. It's unfortunately only in German, but the students are asked to do it at least 2 months before the start of the before they have their examinations or the explanation period starts, because otherwise we cannot make sure that it early enough, because afterwards, after the start of the examination period, it's not possible to get any recognition for these running modules. There is an online application possible. We implemented that in a bigger project funded by the national governance. Unfortunately, there was not that big, how can I say, the faculties were happy with that. And I think I tell that because I think it's quite a normal situation that we have, at least in the German universities, that we try to get a good and stable process for the students to reach in their formulas, that they get recognition of their prior learning. But it's a hard cultural change within the universities that maybe other institutions could be the same as we have within the higher education system. And that's why we struggled quite a lot also here with the online application, because the faculties had the feeling that they may be not that involved anymore, that they should be, but actually that is not the case. They get the formulas, the application formulas in the same way, but it's maybe more a cultural thing, a cultural question, as a formula problem. And then as I said, the competency descriptions and the proof and so on has a complement, so that at the end everything can go to the examination board of each faculty, and they check if we can compare and recognize then the prior learning these students have brought with for specific modules. These are 3 examples how we do it. So 2 more in the case, in the context of the vocational system, with really clear structures and comparison procedures beforehand, and inclusion in the degree programs. And here the more individual pathway, where we try to find a good way to help students which have prior learning experiences, to recognize for specific modules within the diverse study programs. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Professor Maschwitz, for this very helpful insight into the day-to-day practice of actual recognition of prior learning at a higher education institution. Policy discussions alone are nice and helpful, but it's good to also see the other side, how this is actually being implemented at a university. We also have 2 questions in the Q&A section, and I think they're both at the right moment to be addressed right now. One is directed to you specifically, as a follow-up to your presentation. One of our participants would like to know the following. A vocational certificate is level 4 of the European Qualifications Framework, or EQF in short. How do you justify recognition for parts of a program that are examined on EQF level 5 or 6?
Yeah. So especially as you've seen, this is also a continuing education, the vocational system that I mentioned. So it's already based for those or developed for those who have already professional experience. This is the one point. So it's for those with the first step in the vocational system. But you're absolutely right. This is always a discussion that we have also here in Germany about the different levels of vocational training and higher education levels. The bachelor is, in our case, is a 6, and but there's a case that we have already the comparison between a continuing education program on the vocational and bachelor degree, where we see equivalence in the levels that they reach.
Okay, thank you so much. And I think, yes, quite a lot of countries and institutions have discussions because qualifications frameworks level, especially in dual education systems like that of Germany with a vocational sector and a university sector, can be quite tricky. But it's always good then to discuss specific cases and exchange about good practice and solutions to come up with ways of dealing with these tricky issues, which is my segue to the other question that was posted in the Q&A section. It's not actually a question, but more of an idea, but still I would like to address it on this occasion. A participant posted the idea for an exchange or workshop possibility for European universities on operative recognition of prior learning methods, such as interviews. And the participant mentions that Malmö University in Sweden uses structured RPL interviews for access, and that they are right now looking at the study results for RPL admission students whose studies are not yet finished. And it seems that they have better results than students that were admitted the traditional way, which made me wonder whether you actually have any particular exchanges, workshops, whether there is actually a network through which you exchange on cases like this within Germany, your institution, maybe with others.
Yeah, in Germany we have that. So we have, I think we have quite a lot of possibilities. RPL is, I think we are talking about this at now more than maybe 20 years, and in different rounds. And there was a quite, I would say, support from the governance, from the federal states, but also from the national governance. To support us with projects and networks that helped us to have a good network about how we are doing within the universities. As I said, there are universities which are thorough. They have really good class services, which implemented also good structure for the individual processes. But I would say there are good exchange facilities, and I'm also a chairwoman of I would say the German Association for Continuing Education and Distance Education. And also there we are discussing it quite in a broad way, because we are all struggling, especially if those who are dealing with professionals in the study programs, how we can recognize prior learning in an adequate way.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, indeed, I think these exchanges at the cross-institutional level, at the national level, but also at the international, especially European level, are very helpful, which is why we have organized within the Free-in 80+ project, this European network for recognition of prior learning, through which this event is organized. Just a little plug of this network, and also a few words on the project, which is currently organizing and financing the network, which is the Interconnection, Innovation and Inclusion project to realize the Bologna process goals from 2020. So the Free-in 80+ project. Just as a gentle reminder for those who were already here yesterday, and heard the introduction to the European RPL network, which is a network of networks dedicated to recognition of prior learning. And for those who did not join yesterday, just to give you a little bit of a context of who is organizing this and why. Okay, thank you so much to all our speakers, especially now to Professor Marschwitz for your presentations. I would now like to invite all of our other speakers to the stage, switch on the cameras, because there are a couple of questions left that I would like to ask openly into the round of speakers. So we have now heard from the European level, on the one hand from more the overarching European perspective on how countries are doing with regard to recognition of prior learning. We have heard from the students what the students' impression is of how recognition of prior learning is actually implemented in their country. The perspective can be quite different from the national perspective and from the student perspective. And we have heard from Norway about how Norway in particular manages the validation of prior learning, continuing education and lifelong learning. And now we have also had some practice examples of how RPL is actually implemented and approached from Bremen City University of Applied Sciences in Germany. So with this, I think we have quite a good overview over the situation in Europe of how RPL is being approached. But we do not only want to focus on Europe. So this is an event of the European RPL network. Excuse me. And we have heard quite a bit about how this is a policy priority at the European level and at the level of many countries and institutions in Europe in particular. But the demographic changes and challenges that have been addressed do, of course, not stop at the borders of Europe. And there is perhaps also something to learn from our non-European partners. So I would like to know how you actually see the situation of recognition of prior learning in the context of outside of Europe. Do you, in your context, make any distinction between recognition of prior learning within Europe? So for applicants from European countries versus non-European countries. Dag mentioned the case of refugees in particular before. And in the context of demographic changes, the need for more internationalization also outside of Europe is evident. So I would like to know, how do you see recognition of prior learning for applicants from outside of Europe? Different or not? More challenging? Equally challenging, not challenging at all? What are your views on that? Dag, perhaps would you like to start, since you mentioned the case of refugees before?
I can start. Norway has a long tradition of working on the refugee issue and how to kind of integrate refugees and how to find their qualifications and so on, as I mentioned. So right now, if you are a refugee and you can't have you have no papers, and you can't get your papers, so you can't document your qualification, then you are put in a track which is systemized and where we recognize or try to recognize the education. And of course, this is then it might be it should be formal qualification in a sense, though it isn't really just prior learning, but in real life, it does have a lot of the same qualities as they cannot prove the formal qualification. If you come from abroad and you have qualifications, of course, these are recognized and you follow the same rules. But I mean, in real life, it is harder coming from both outside Norway and outside Europe, and especially because you have the language issue in addition to that. I mean that you need a proficiency. Most, Norwegian education is taught in Norwegian. So that means that you actually, as a foreigner, you need to acquire proficient language skills, which of course is a hurdle. You have some programs in English, but most are in Norwegian. And the other thing is that even though they are in Norwegian, you will also be required to have proficiency in English because a lot of your reading material will be in English. So if you look at kind of the formal hurdles and the real hurdles, it is obviously difficult, more difficult coming from abroad. And so I would say that there is kind of a path in a sense that if you immigrate to Norway, if you're here as a refugee, whatever, there is an integration process where you will have to acquire Norwegian proficient enough to actually enter higher education before you can be in reality evaluated for recognition of prior learning. And of course, Norwegians or people settled in Norway do not have that same hurdle to pass. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think this is something that everybody can relate to from our own national contexts. I don't know if one of the other speakers would like to follow up on that. If you have anything to add. I see David waving a hand. Yes?
Well, I'll try if I don't get cut out. I'm sorry with the network again. But yeah, just on the refugee issue, first of all, I mean, many people are maybe not aware, but countries are all legally obliged to recognize qualifications and prior learning of refugees. It's part of it's a specific article of the Lisbon Recognition Convention, Article 7. And which all countries in Europe have actually signed up to. So there are actually legal obligations to have procedures in place for recognizing qualifications which can't necessarily be documented, as Doug said, with paper and the normal methods. So although it's a legal obligation, unfortunately, what we pick up is that there are plenty of countries which still do not have these procedures in place, and certainly don't have with the kind of Syrian and then Ukrainian refugee numbers coming into Europe in recent years. So I think we saw some developments of better practice in these cases. But just to say, yes, it's a legal obligation. So countries should all be addressing this. Second thing is, I completely agree with Doug that that it may be more difficult than dealing with kind of students that have come through your own system, and we see the evidence of that also with migrant populations in general that in different European countries. So there's a very strong tendency that you can see that first generation migrants tend to have a lot of problems in terms of educational attainment when they come to
David, you're breaking off. Could you perhaps switch off your camera?
System, whereas the cases. So this. You didn't. So basically, quite strong evidence that that we're not doing a very good job in terms of recognizing the learning acquired from migrant populations in general, and I think we should be really making much better efforts to try to be, because it's actually a waste of resources and a waste of human potential if we don't put in place better ways of recognizing the education attainments that people have and supporting them to progress further for their own benefit, but also for the benefit of the society. So I think it's actually a policy which makes a lot of sense for societal development, especially in societies where, as we all are now, where migrant communities are going to be increasingly the norm. However much some politicians may pretend otherwise, we're going to increasingly see migrant movements in the world, and I think we need to be doing much more to address this particular issue. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Helen,
Yes, of course. Continue.
can I add a little to that?
Of course.
I mean, we are sitting sort of in between the institution and the political bodies, and we see that there is often a difficulty that policies and ideals and incentive structures are not necessarily working the same way. That on one hand, the university institutions are obliged to do something, but they might not be rewarded for it in real life. As I said, nothing is better than if you have results that shows that people that are admitted on the basis of recognition of prior learning, if they do better, we have some experiences that they might drop out, and of course then the university loses money. This is not the way it is. I'm just saying we have some experiences in this. And for example, in Norway, as we do have grade-based admissions, there are no quotas. I mean, for example, so that means that you can use recognition of prior learning as a basis of access and admission, but then you will have some concrete admissions criteria to the program that you apply to. But the problem is it does not work for ranking, which means that if there are more applicants to a program than there are actually places, then those who have recognition of prior learning will always go to the bottom as the system. There's no quota for them, and you can't rank them because they have no grades. So this means, and I'm not saying that this is only negative, that you will never get into medicine or odontology or law, for example, but that most of these who are admitted on this basis will go in the more rural districts in Norway, not in the centralized big universities, and also on programs that might not fill up, which then makes it a good thing for the university because they want programs to fill up. So the incentive structure for actually having processes in admitting people on the basis of recognition of prior learning is bigger if you have programs that are, or if you have empty spaces at your university than if you are more attractive. See what I mean?
Absolutely, yes. I think we can all agree that there is unfortunately often a gap between policies and ambitions and the actual practice and what you can do with the tools and the resources you are given at the institutional level. I saw a hand at Professor Maschwitz's side. Would you like to follow up on that?
I only want to underline that. So it's really a really important point. I said it was a question of cultural change, but of course it's also a question about resources. So there was a big fear about implementing this systematically individual recognition approach because they thought within the faculties, they get so many applications from the students that they cannot handle it anymore. So that was the biggest fear about this online system, that it could be so systematically improved that afterwards we cannot handle it anymore. So because there are not extra resources for that. And the same thing is with the recognition from uni entrance qualifications from other countries. So we are really committed to that. So we have a strong system also within Bremen, the federal state in Germany. But also there, we need the teachers, the lecturers who are helping us to approve, to go to the assessments, to do the assessments, and they're not rewarded for that. And this is a big discussion right now because the results, it's similar track has shown it's really a small number who are really passing the system and less who are entering the universities, and it's quite a high amount of work that we have to deliver for that. So yeah, this is really some, maybe not, maybe it needs some time to get part of a system. But it's really a question how we can handle it without extra resources at the universities.
Indeed, yes, this is absolutely understandable. Since you already mentioned that it's a cultural process that takes time, and from the previous presentations, I think we also clearly understood that there have been massive improvements between now compared to 20 years ago. I was wondering if you dare to look a little bit into the future and give a little bit of an estimate how you see the situation for recognition of prior learning developing. This is obviously a topic that is on the policy agenda of Europe with its demographic changes. There's also a big demand for societal, but also social reasons to make learning paths more flexible, more fluid, more equitable. Do you see any new developments or pushes for recognition of prior learning on the horizon? Either in Germany, at the institutional level in Bremen, or maybe in Europe. Well, Europe probably, but it is really down to the institutions. Yes, please.
Maybe it's down to the institution, but at least to the different countries, I think, because at the moment in Germany, we have the big challenge, I would say, that the private universities are rising, and we have a more free system of in higher education system. They don't paying fees or small amount that they have to pay. This the students are free of charge, more or less, and the private ones not. And the private ones use these recognition of prior learning as a main selling point. They try, as I described, this kind of inclusion within the degrees or in the contracts that they also have with companies. They use it as a real selling point, and think this competitive factor could be a push. Not that we want to do it maybe in the same way they're doing, because sometimes we can also ask about quality within the systems and some points. But I think it will give a push, at least with universities of applied science, to do it even more, because it's a competitive factor.
Absolutely, yes, that makes sense. Dag, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think we're going to move forward like we have done in the past, so to speak. I think that if we look back in 10 years, we will have seen changes again. And when it comes to Norway, we are working a lot on getting more and more people to complete higher education or there's upper secondary, which means that there will be fewer who would actually need to do this to get into higher education. So I think for us, the issue might swing more towards immigration, and see that that will be kind of the larger cohort that will need this. I also think that this is one of our responsibilities to help kind of align the political ambitions with the groundwork out in the institution. And like we were talking about, providing tools for actually doing this, getting it more methodically, getting it to be the same, getting more information, getting it more structure in the sense that it doesn't vary so much from institution to institution, will also increase the attractiveness and the knowledge about this in society as a general. So I think I'm hopeful in this, but it's still quite costly. And I also think that for the admission to higher education programs, that is one thing. Getting it included in higher education degrees, is much harder because of the quality assurance question. Because, of course, the institution has to kind of take responsibility for the quality assurance of the whole learning outcome. So it's a longer road. But then again, things are changing, and you have micro-credentials, you have joint degrees, international degrees. I mean, this degree structure as such is changing. And I think that the prior learning is going to be a part of that. Where we end up, I don't know, but we will definitely move forward.
Always great to end on a positive note. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I would like to add that especially the European universities, which are funded right now, give a big push to that, I would say, at least at the European level, because we're discussing not only we can recognize between the universities, we are also dealing with the topic of lifelong learners in a really deeper way we have done before, I would say, and how we can develop programs or micro-credentials also for professionals, and how to combine that with undergraduate and graduate programs. So I think this is also a push again to think about how we can use prior recognition of prior learning as a key factor for us as a university.
Absolutely, yes. we do see certainly a push for that and a great support. So let's hope that we do see some major developments in the upcoming years. Well, thanks so much for engaging in this discussion. I would now still like to use the opportunity to engage our audience a little bit, and we have prepared 2 little polls for our audience. I hope they are still energetic enough to take part in our polls. So I hope that everybody sees now on their screen the question, does your country or institution have a policy for recognition of prior learning? And here, what is important here is, if you're not sure, this is not a factual question per se. It's just something we would like to hear from you. Are you aware of a policy for recognition of prior learning? Because if there is one, but you are not aware at all, then I think that also speaks quite a bit for itself. So please simply feel free to answer on the basis of your knowledge instead of abstaining from the vote because you're not 100% sure. So far, the yeses, the yays, they are winning, whereas we have very few no's, which is a very good result. So I will just keep this open for a little bit longer. And I would like to bring in again our 2 European level speakers. I do have the impression from the 2 presentations we had before about the Bologna process level, the level of the European higher education area, meaning the countries that have committed to implementing the Bologna process, that the students are perhaps a little bit more pessimistic about recognition of prior learning than what the ministries reported. Is that impression accurate? Do you perhaps see a little bit more of experience challenges on the sides of students, whereas the ministries obviously have the policies that are in place and they know exactly what they have done to promote the recognition of prior learning. David and Nora, would you perhaps like to comment on the poll results that we do see here, with most of our participants, really overwhelming majority, saying that they do actually have a policy for recognition of prior learning in place? Does this chime in with your impression from your survey results, from your reports on the implementation of the Bologna process? Nora, would you perhaps like to start?
Yes, I would like to stress again on that from our report, we have gathered data on implementing it. So having policy and implementing it are 2 different things. So yeah, I feel that this poll results is a bit surprising to me, but I can understand where the differences come from.
Yes, indeed. So I have now also closed the poll and I'm sharing the results. So I hope everybody can see that a whole 88% of our participants today have answered, yes, we do have a policy for recognition of prior learning, whereas only 12% have said, no, we do not have that, or at least we're not aware of that, which is a very good result. David, would you, well, I know that you might have some technical issues, but if you're able and willing, would you also like to comment on that?
Well, I can try. I don't know if you'll hear me. But yeah, I mean, I think Nora is right. But the other aspect is probably the audience here is not a representative sample. It's probably people who are have an interest in beyond the average of on recognition of prior learning. So that also probably contributes to the positive result. But the I mean, I think what we, nevertheless, you know, that we can still say that these things are not in contradiction, that you can have policies in place, but that they're not well implemented. So, so you know, legislation may permit recognition of prior learning, but as the speakers have told us from Norway and Germany, that sometimes the incentives are not there for institutions to make use of them. So, so I think that's also a policy challenge for the future. You know, that it needs to be worthwhile from an institutional perspective to actually put in place what makes sense at a national policy level. So we need to work on that, as well as simply developing policies and having them embedded in legislation. It's also really working at the level of institutions to build up a better cultural implementation of RPL. And I think these things are all perfectly compatible with both, you know, the SU findings, our findings, and the experience from on the ground that we've heard this morning.
Indeed. Thank you, David. And I think those are actually quite good concluding words, because they sum up what we have found today. So I would like to thank all our speakers very much for their insights, for the information they shared, and the links to further information. I would like to thank the audience for their questions and their engagement throughout this session. You will receive the presentations that were shared today, and the recording will be available later on as well on the website of this conference. Just before I send you home, I would like to remind you that this is actually an event in a series. So next week, on the 12th of November, we continue with the third event of the series, and the event is dedicated to implementing RPL in higher education institutions, building a trust-based culture. So there we will really address the cultural changes that are needed to truly implement recognition of prior learning in higher education. Thank you again for today, and I wish you a pleasant rest of the day.